The bride of the Black Mansion. Deep in the northern hills, where the pine forest grew so thick that sunlight forgot the ground by afternoon, there stood a mansion. The villagers below called it Kali Haveli, the Black Mansion, though no one remembered if it was named for the color of its stone or the color of what lived inside it. For 30 years, no door had opened, no window had let out smoke, and no living soul had spent a night beneath its roof and lived to speak clearly of it. This is the story of the one night that changed that. Zara had been married for 11 days. She sat now in the passenger seat of an old grey Jeep, her henna still dark on her palms, watching the trees blur past the window as the road climbed higher into the hills. Beside her, driving with one hand and holding hers with the other, was her husband, Hamza, 26 years old, an engineer by profession, an adventurer by nature, and utterly, foolishly in love. It had been his idea, this trip. A honeymoon away from the noise of family and wedding functions, away from relatives who still hadn't stopped congratulating them. Hamza wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere different. And when his college friend Adil, half joking, half daring him, mentioned an old abandoned mansion in the hills that locals refused to go near, Hamza's eyes had lit up in the exact way Zara had learned, in 11 short days, meant trouble. Absolutely not, she had said. Just for one night, he had said back, grinning. Think about it, we'll have the whole place to ourselves. No hotel bookings, no crowds. Just us. She should have said no. She would think that, later, more times than she could count. The road ended 2 kilometers from the mansion, swallowed by weeds and fallen branches, so they left the jeep and walked the rest of the way as evening came down over the hills like a lid closing on a pot. The forest around them was unnaturally quiet. No birds. No insects. Only the sound of their own footsteps and, once, something that might have been a low, dry laugh carried on the wind, gone before either of them could be sure they'd heard it at all. Then the trees parted, and the Black Mansion stood before them. It was enormous, 3 stories of dark stone, its windows like empty eye sockets, ivy strangling its walls in thick black ropes. A wrought iron gate hung crooked on one hinge, and beyond it, a garden gone entirely to wilderness, roses grown feral and thorned, choking whatever paths had once wound through them. It's beautiful, Zara said quietly, and meant it, even though her skin had gone cold the moment she'd looked at it. Told you, Hamza said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. They pushed through the gate together. The house that waited. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the particular silence of a place that has been empty a very long time, except that it did not feel empty. It felt occupied, the way a room feels when someone has just left it, or is standing just behind a door, listening. They found a room on the ground floor that seemed least ruined, a study, once grand, with a fireplace and a great cracked mirror on one wall, its surface gone silver-black with age. Hamza built a small fire from broken furniture while Zara laid out their sleeping bags, and for a while, in the flickering orange light, it almost felt like an adventure again. They ate the biscuits and dried fruit they'd packed, laughed about nothing, and Zara let herself believe, just for an hour, that the house was only a house. Then the temperature dropped. It happened all at once. The fire did not die, but the warmth around them vanished, replaced by a cold that came from inside rather than from any window or draft. Zara pulled her shawl tighter and looked at Hamza, who had gone very still, staring at the mirror on the wall. Hamza, did you see that? See what? He didn't answer. He was still looking at the mirror, at their own reflections in the firelight, except that for one impossible second, Zara was certain she had seen a third shape standing behind them both. Tall. Still. Watching. When she turned to look behind her, there was nothing there. It's an old house, she said, more to convince herself than him. Old glass does strange things. But that night, neither of them slept easily. Somewhere in the depths of the mansion, doors opened and closed with no wind to move them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging slightly, crossed floors above their heads, though the upper stories had looked, from outside, entirely collapsed. And once, just as Zara finally drifted toward sleep, she heard, close to her ear, a voice. It said her name. Not Zara the way Hamza said it, warm and familiar. It said her name the way one might taste something rare and long desired. Slowly. Reverently. Zara. She sat bolt upright, heart hammering, but Hamza was asleep beside her, undisturbed, and the fire had burned down to embers, and the room was, once again, only a room. 3. The story of the house. She did not tell Hamza about the voice. Not yet. In the grey light of morning, with sunlight actually managing to needle through the grimy windows, the fear of the night before felt almost embarrassing, almost imagined. Almost. They explored the house by daylight, and it was Hamza who found the old study desk in a room down the east corridor, its drawers still holding yellowed papers, a diary swollen with damp, and a black and white photograph, curling at the edges, of a young bride in wedding clothes far older in style than anything worn today. The diary belonged to a man named Rafiq Shah, who had built the mansion nearly 70 years ago for his new wife, a woman named Sakina, the bride in the photograph, and, Zara thought with a strange lurch in her chest, a woman whose face bore an unsettling resemblance to her own. Dark eyes. A small mole near the left corner of her mouth. The same one Zara had. The diary's final entries were disjointed, feverish, the handwriting deteriorating into a frantic scrawl. Rafiq wrote of strange dreams that came to his wife every night after they moved into the mansion, dreams of a great and beautiful being who visited her while she slept and called himself, in her dreams, her true husband. He wrote of Sakina growing distant, pale, of finding her standing before mirrors at odd hours, speaking softly to her own reflection as though someone stood on the other side of the glass. The last entry, dated the night before the diary ended entirely, read only, "He has asked for her, and I fear the house will not let her refuse. God forgive me, I do not think I can protect her from something that does not fear iron, or fire, or prayer. Tonight I will try one final thing. If I fail, I ask whoever reads this, never let a bride sleep beneath this roof again." Sakina Shah, they later learned from a faded newspaper clipping tucked inside the diary's back cover, had vanished from the mansion on her wedding night, 1 year after it was built. Her husband was found dead of no discoverable cause 3 days later, in the very study where Zara and Hamza had slept. Zara closed the diary with hands that would not quite stop shaking. "We're leaving," she said. "Now. Before it gets dark." Hamza, to his credit, did not argue. But the forest, when they tried to walk back through it, was no longer the forest they remembered. The path had vanished. The trees seemed to have rearranged themselves into a wall of trunks and thorned branches too thick to push through, and no matter which direction they turned, they found themselves, always, walking back toward the mansion's crooked iron gate. By the time the sun began sinking behind the hills, they understood, without needing to say it aloud, that the house was not going to let them leave. He who waited in the walls. That second night, Hamza built the fire larger, brighter, as though light alone might be armor. Zara sat close beside him, the diary in her lap, and told him everything. The voice that had said her name, the shape in the mirror, the terrible certainty growing in her chest that this was not simply an old house with old ghosts, but something with a will, an appetite, a want. "Jinn," Hamza said quietly, and the word seemed to make the fire gutter, just slightly. "My grandmother used to tell stories. Places like this, built where they shouldn't be, on ground that isn't ours to build on. She said some of them, the old and powerful ones, they can fall in love. Obsess. And they don't understand know the way people do. That's not comforting, Hamza. I know." He took her hand. "But we're going to be all right. I promise you." It was, she would later think, the last completely ordinary thing he said to her that night. The cold came again, deeper than before, and this time the darkness around their small fire seemed to thicken, pressing in at the edges of the light like a curtain drawn slowly closed. The footsteps returned overhead, but they were no longer content to stay above. They descended. Slow, heavy, deliberate, each step landing with a weight that made dust sift down from the ceiling. The study door, which Hamza had wedged shut with a broken chair, groaned open on its own. Nothing stood in the doorway, and yet the air beyond it was wrong. Darker than the hallway should have been, darker than darkness itself, as though something enormous stood just outside the reach of the firelight, folding the shadows around its shape like a cloak. Then it spoke. The voice was resonant, ancient, edged with something that might once have been beauty and had long since curdled into hunger. "Sakina," it said. "You came back to me. I'm not Sakina, Zara whispered, though her voice shook so badly she wasn't sure the words carried at all. My name is Zara. A long silence. And then, almost tenderly, names change. Faces return. You wear her face, her eyes, the mark upon her mouth. You are what I have waited 70 years to see walk through that door again. I built this house from stone and shadow so that one like you would always, eventually, come home. Hamza rose, putting himself between Zara and the doorway, and though Zara could see how badly his hands trembled, his voice, when it came, was steady. She is my wife, he said. Not yours. Not ever yours. The darkness in the doorway seemed to expand, and for one terrible moment, two eyes opened within it, not human eyes, but 2 points of dull red fire, set impossibly high, impossibly far apart, regarding Hamza the way one might regard an insect that had wandered somewhere it did not belong. Husband, the voice said, and there was amusement in it now, cruel and ancient. A boy who thinks a ceremony of 11 days can undo 70 years of waiting. Step aside, little husband, and I may let you leave this house with your life. Stay in my way, and I promise you, you will share Rafiq Shah's fate, and this study will remember 2 bridegrooms instead of 1. What the diary did not say. Zara's mind was racing, but somewhere beneath the terror, a single thought surfaced and would not let go. Rafiq had written that he tried one final thing the night Sakina vanished. Whatever it was, it hadn't saved her, but it had killed the jinn's plan, at least long enough that the house had waited 70 more years for another bride to walk through its gate. Iron and fire and prayer had not worked, he'd written. So what had he tried instead? She grabbed the diary from where she'd dropped it and flipped desperately to the last page, searching not just the final entry but the blank pages after it, and there, pressed so faintly into the paper that she'd missed it before, she found words scratched not with ink but with something sharper, gouged directly into the page as though written in a final, desperate hurry. Not iron. Not fire. A name. Every jinn that builds itself a house and a face has a true name buried beneath the false one, and a true name, spoken aloud by the one it desires, unmakes the illusion it has built around itself. Sakina never learned his name in time. I pray whoever comes after her does. Below that, barely legible, 3 words, foreign and strange on the tongue. A name. Zara read it once, silently, then looked up at the shape in the doorway, which had gone very still, as though it, too, sensed something had shifted in the room. What are you doing? It said, and for the first time, the ancient certainty in its voice had cracked, just slightly, into something almost like unease. You said I wear her face, Zara said, forcing her voice steady, forcing herself to stand even as every instinct screamed at her to run. But I know something Sakina never got the chance to know. She spoke the name. The effect was immediate and violent. The darkness in the doorway convulsed, folding in on itself like paper thrown into a flame, and the 2 red eyes flared impossibly bright before beginning to shrink, the vast unseen shape behind them shuddering as though struck. The voice that had been smooth and ancient became something closer to a shriek, layered with a dozen other voices beneath it, voices that might once have belonged to Sakina, and to others before her, and others still, all crying out at once as the illusion the jinn had built for itself over 70 patient years tore apart at the seams. You dare, it began, and then the word broke apart into a sound with no human shape at all. Hamza grabbed Zara's hand and pulled her back toward the far corner of the room as the mansion itself seemed to scream, walls cracking, dust and plaster raining from the ceiling, the fireplace flaring up in a burst of green-white flame that cast the entire room in a light like nothing either of them had ever seen. The shape in the doorway collapsed inward, smaller and smaller, the red eyes guttering like dying coals, until with one final, bone-deep groan that seemed to come from the house's very foundations, it was simply gone. Silence. The ordinary, blessed silence of an old house with nothing in it at all. Morning. They did not sleep again that night. They sat together by the dying fire until the first grey light crept through the windows, and when it came, they gathered their things without a word and walked out through the crooked iron gate, and this time, the forest let them pass. The path was there, exactly as they remembered it, the trees ordinary and green and full, at last, with the sound of birds. Neither of them looked back at the mansion. But Zara, just once, thought she heard, very faint, very far away, carried on the wind the way that dry laugh had been carried the evening before, a single, long, defeated sigh, the sound of something ancient finally, truly, letting go. They reached the jeep as the sun cleared the hills. Hamza started the engine with hands that still hadn't fully stopped shaking, and Zara looked at him, at her husband of 13 days now, who had stood in a doorway between her and a creature older than memory and refused to move, and for the first time since they'd entered the forest, she laughed. It came out shaky and half hysterical, but it was real. "Some honeymoon," she said. Hamza managed a laugh too, though his eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, to the mansion shrinking behind them between the trees. "Next time," he said, "I'm booking a hotel." They never went back. And though the villagers in the valley still speak of the Black Mansion, still warn travelers away from the forest road, there is one thing that changed after that night, something the old women of the village noticed within the year and still speak of quietly among themselves. The house, for the first time in 70 years, had gone completely silent. No lights. No footsteps. No voice calling out into the dark for a bride who was never coming home again. Whatever had waited in the Black Mansion, waiting had finally, truly, come to an end.